On the first day at a high-security canine training center, something unthinkable happened. A police dog attacked his own handler. No warning, no provocation, just instinct. The officers were stunned. The trainers were certain. The dog was unstable. They locked him away. But over the next 2 nights, strange things began to happen. Classified files disappeared without a single lock being broken. An officer was attacked in the dark. A fire erupted in the middle of the compound. And still, the dog kept reacting. Not with aggression, with fear. What no one understood was this: the dog wasn't attacking without reason. He was trying to warn them, because the real danger wasn't outside the fence. It was already inside. The K9 National Training Center stood isolated at the edge of the desert, far from cities and distractions. It was built for one purpose only: to train dogs and handlers for situations where mistakes cost lives. That morning, officers arrived from all across the country. Different backgrounds, different agencies, but all of them carried the same quiet tension in their posture, the awareness that this place would push them beyond their limits. Officer Troy arrived just after sunrise. Ranger walked beside him, calm and focused, his leash loose, his movements controlled. He was a German shepherd bred and trained for elite service. Every muscle in his body carried discipline. Every step showed trust. Troy had trained Ranger himself. 4 years together. Thousands of commands spoken. Thousands more never needed. Ranger understood Troy through tone, posture, breathing. Their bond had been forged through long nights, dangerous searches, and moments where only absolute trust kept them alive. As they entered the main training field, the environment came alive around them. Dogs barked from their kennels. Metal gates clanged shut. Boots scraped against concrete. The air smelled of fuel, dust, and sweat. Ranger remained steady. Until he didn't. Halfway across the field, his pace slowed. His ears shifted backward. His breathing changed. His nose lifted slightly, pulling in the air as if searching for something invisible. Troy felt the tension travel up the leash. Ranger had done this before, when explosives were nearby, when something was hidden, when danger lingered unseen. But this was different. There was no target. Only Troy. When the first evaluation began, the commands were simple. Routine. The kind Ranger had executed perfectly hundreds of times before. This time, there was hesitation, not defiance. Fear. Ranger's eyes stayed locked on Troy's face, studying him as if something about him no longer made sense. Then it happened. Ranger lunged. The force was sudden and overwhelming. Troy was knocked backward, hitting the ground hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs. For a brief moment, the world became noise and motion. Boots running, voices shouting, hands grabbing. Ranger's teeth snapped close to Troy's shoulder. Not to kill, to warn. Troy raised his arms instinctively, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. Commands came automatically, but Ranger didn't respond. His body trembled with tension, caught between instinct and loyalty. It took several handlers to pull him away. The field fell silent. Troy lay on the concrete, staring upward, his chest rising too fast. Pain spread across his shoulder, where fabric had torn and skin had broken. Blood soaked into his uniform. It wasn't a serious wound, but it shouldn't have existed at all. Ranger was restrained, his body rigid. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. A low, distressed sound escaped his throat. A sound Troy had never heard from him before. Fear. Pure and unmistakable. Ranger was removed from the field and taken to the holding enclosure. As the heavy steel door closed, the sound echoed across the yard. And inside, Troy's chest. Ranger turned his head once, eyes locked on Troy. They weren't aggressive. They were pleading. That night, Troy sat alone in his quarters. The medics had treated his injury and left without answers. Everyone avoided his eyes. Some whispered, others stared. A K9 attacking its own handler was almost unheard of. Troy replayed the moment over and over in his mind. He searched for signs he might have missed. Stress, fatigue, a mistake in training. Anything that could explain what had happened. Nothing did. Across the compound, Ranger paced inside his enclosure. The floor was cold beneath his paws. Every unfamiliar sound made his muscles tighten. His nose pressed against the ventilation grates, pulling in scent after scent. Concrete, metal, oil, and something else. Something wrong. Ranger lay down but did not rest. His ears remained alert. His eyes stayed open. He had done the unthinkable. He had turned on the only human he trusted. Not out of aggression, but because his instincts were screaming a warning no one else could hear. And whatever that warning was, it had only just arrived. Night fell slowly over the K9 National Training Center. The heat of the day faded, replaced by a dry, uneasy silence. Floodlights illuminated the main yard, casting long shadows across concrete paths and chain-link fences. Most of the dogs had settled into restless quiet, their earlier barking replaced by low breathing and occasional movement. For the officers, the first night carried a strange weight. No one spoke openly about what had happened that morning, but everyone felt it. A K9 attacking its own handler was not just an incident. It was a crack in something everyone depended on. Trust. Officer Troy remained awake long after lights out. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the facility. The hum of generators, the faint rattle of metal. Somewhere far away, a radio crackled briefly before falling silent again. His shoulder throbbed beneath the bandage. The physical pain was nothing compared to the question looping endlessly in his mind. Why? Ranger had always been precise, controlled, loyal to a fault. Troy had trusted him with his life more times than he could count. And now, Ranger sat alone in a holding enclosure, labeled unstable. Across the compound, Ranger remained alert. He did not sleep. Every sound filtered through his senses with unnatural clarity. Footsteps in the distance. A door opening, then closing. The faint electrical buzz of surveillance equipment. Most of it was familiar, but not all of it. There was a tension in the air that had not been there before, a presence that did not belong. Ranger's breathing slowed as he listened. Then, footsteps. Light, careful, not rushed. They moved along the perimeter fence, stopping briefly near the administrative building before continuing toward the records wing. Ranger's ears flattened. Something was wrong. The night officer made his rounds alone. He moved through the corridors with practiced routine, flashlight sweeping over doors and locks. Everything appeared normal. No alarms, no alerts. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. As he approached the records room, his radio emitted a burst of static. Sharp, sudden. He frowned and adjusted the dial. The static returned, louder this time, swallowing the signal entirely. He took another step. That was when he felt it. A presence behind him. He turned, and the world exploded into motion. A blow struck the side of his head, sending him crashing to the floor. His flashlight skidded across the concrete, spinning uselessly as darkness closed in. His radio hissed with static, then fell silent. By the time the officer was found, hours later, he was unconscious. The records room door stood closed, locked. Inside, One secured cabinet had been opened, and several classified K9 files were gone. Morning brought tension instead of clarity. Word spread quickly through the center. The missing files, the injured officer, the lack of forced entry, no broken locks, no damaged cameras, no alarms. Triggered. Someone inside the facility had done this. Briefings were held behind closed doors. Officers exchanged looks that were no longer friendly. Conversations stopped when others approached. Trust eroded quietly. Troy stood near the edge of the main yard, watching handlers train with their dogs. Everything looked normal from a distance. Commands were given. Dogs responded. Movements were precise. But something had shifted. People watched each other now. He felt it in the way eyes lingered on him longer than they should. The handler whose K9 attacked him, the liability, the question mark. Ranger remained confined. Troy was allowed to visit him once, under supervision. Ranger pressed against the barrier when he saw Troy, whining softly. His body trembled, not with aggression, but with urgency. His nose worked frantically, as if trying to read something from Troy's scent. Troy stood still, unsure what to do. He had never felt fear around Ranger before. Now, he didn't know what Ranger felt about him, or what Ranger was trying to tell him. The investigation deepened. Security footage revealed nothing useful. The cameras had gone to static for less than 30 seconds, just long enough for someone to move unseen. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate. That afternoon, Senior Trainer Morgan addressed the assembled officers. His voice carried easily across the yard. He spoke of discipline, of procedure, of vigilance. Then he said something that settled heavily over the group. A simple statement. A truth every K9 handler knew. A K9 does not attack without a reason. The words lingered in the air long after he moved on. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others looked toward the holding area where Ranger was kept. If the dog hadn't attacked randomly, then something had triggered him. And if something had triggered him, then something dangerous was already inside the center. That night, sleep came even harder. The injured officer remained under observation. The missing files were not recovered. Guards doubled patrols, but unease spread faster than reassurance. Radios crackled more frequently now. Static bursts, short, unexplained. Troy lay awake again, counting his breaths, listening to every sound. Each footstep outside his door made his muscles tense. Across the compound, Ranger paced. His senses screamed. The smell was stronger tonight, sharp, chemical, wrong. Footsteps again, closer this time. Ranger pressed against the bars, breathing hard. His claws scraped softly against the floor as he strained toward the sound. He could hear a heart beating, fast, unnatural. Then the footsteps faded. Silence returned. But Ranger did not relax, because the threat had not left. It had only moved. And somewhere in the darkness of the K9 National Training Center, the first move of a larger plan had already been made. The fire started just after midnight. At first, it was only a faint smell, sharp, unnatural, cutting through the dry desert air. Then came the smoke. Thin at first, barely visible under the floodlights, before thickening into dark clouds that rolled low across the training yard. Seconds later, the alarm screamed to life. A piercing, mechanical wail tore through the night, shattering sleep and silence alike. Red emergency lights flashed across buildings, fences, and concrete paths. Doors flew open, boots hit the ground, radios crackled with overlapping voices, half panicked, half trained. Inside the kennel wing, the system responded automatically. Every containment door released at once. Steel locks disengaged with a deafening series of metallic clicks, and the canines were free. Dogs burst from their enclosures in a storm of motion and sound. Barking echoed violently against the walls. Paws thundered across concrete. Some animals ran in confusion, disoriented by smoke and alarms. Others knew exactly where to go. Ranger exploded out of his enclosure the moment the door opened. Smoke burned his lungs as he surged forward, ignoring the chaos around him. His ears were pinned back, his body low and fast, cutting through the haze with singular focus. He did not look for safety. He followed the smell. Gasoline, strong, fresh, overpowering. It led him straight across the yard, straight toward the parking area. Officer Troy stumbled out of his quarters, heart pounding, eyes stinging from smoke. The air was thick with heat and the sound of barking dogs. Emergency crews rushed past him toward the source of the flames, which now climbed hungrily along the side of a maintenance structure near the lot. Then he saw Ranger. The dog was already there. Ranger circled Troy's vehicle, barking violently, his movements sharp and frantic. His nose pressed to the ground, then to the tires, then to the underside of the car. His barking was not random. It was urgent, warning. Other canines began to converge, drawn by Ranger's intensity. One by one, they joined him, sniffing the pavement, the wheels, the air itself. Handlers followed, coughing, shouting commands that were barely heard over the alarms. The smell hit them next. Gasoline, thick, pungent, impossible to miss. Someone shouted for fire suppression units to redirect. Another voice called for all personnel to clear the area. Flames crackled nearby, feeding on spilled fuel and dry debris. Troy stood frozen beside his car. The truth hit him all at once. His vehicle. It had been acting strange for days. A faint smell after long drives. A leak he had planned to report but hadn't yet. Training had been intense. Time had slipped away. Now the evidence surrounded him. Ranger barked louder, his body rigid, eyes locked on Troy as if trying to force him to understand something more. But the moment passed too quickly. Fire crews arrived, foam spraying across the pavement. The flames were beaten back, then slowly smothered. Smoke lingered, heavy and suffocating. The immediate danger was over. The questions had only just begun. The conclusion came fast, too fast. The gasoline was traced to Troy's vehicle. The leak explained the fire. The spreading fumes. The ignition point near the maintenance building. An accident. Unfortunate, dangerous, but simple. Some officers even expressed relief. A problem with a clear cause was easier to accept than sabotage. Easier than betrayal. And Ranger had detected it. That was the story that settled in. The heroic K9, alerting everyone to the source of the fire before it became catastrophic. A few handlers nodded in approval. Some even spoke of commendation. A dog doing what he was trained to do. Troy wanted to believe it. He really did. But Ranger didn't calm down. As the scene cleared and the smoke thinned, Ranger continued to bark. Loud, sharp, relentless. His eyes never left Troy. His body trembled with the same frantic energy as before. This wasn't resolution. It was panic. Handlers tried to restrain him. Commands were given. Ranger ignored them all. His instincts screamed that the danger wasn't gone. Because the gasoline smell wasn't the problem. It was a sign. And no one was listening. Ranger was pulled away once again. His nails scraped against the pavement as he resisted, barking and twisting, his body language desperate. The other canines slowly dispersed, confusion replacing focus. The moment Ranger was secured, the yard felt wrong. Too quiet. The decision was made quickly. Ranger was returned to confinement. for the second time. Later, Troy stood alone near the holding enclosure. The fire had been declared contained. Damage was minimal. No casualties. Official reports were already being drafted. Accidental fire caused by vehicle malfunction. Case closed. Ranger lay inside his enclosure, chest heaving, eyes wide and unblinking. When he saw Troy, his barking stopped abruptly. He pressed himself against the bars, whining softly, his tail low. The silence hurt more than the noise had. Troy felt something break inside him. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to promise he would fix everything. But Ranger didn't need words. He needed someone to understand that he had never been reacting to the fire. He had been reacting to what came before it, and what still hadn't ended. Troy turned away, his jaw clenched tight. He had failed Ranger again. That night, the training center returned to uneasy quiet. The smell of smoke lingered in the air. Soot stained the pavement near the parking lot. Guards doubled their patrols, but confidence had not returned. Across the compound, Ranger lay awake. The gasoline smell still clung to his senses, but beneath it was something worse. Human fear, calculated, intentional. Ranger lowered his head to the floor, ears twitching at every distant sound. He had tried to warn them. Again and again, he had been silenced. As the lights dimmed and the center settled into restless sleep, one truth remained buried beneath official explanations and convenient conclusions. The second night felt different. The K9 National Training Center was quieter than it had ever been, yet no one felt at ease. After the fire, after the explanations, after the convenient conclusions, something unseen still pressed against the edges of everyone's awareness. The air itself seemed tense. Guards walked their routes more slowly now, scanning shadows that hadn't bothered them before. Radios were checked repeatedly, fingers hovering near the volume knobs, as if everyone expected the static to return. It did. Short bursts, sharp and sudden, gone before anyone could trace the source. Across the compound, Ranger remained confined. His body was still, but his mind was not. He lay with his head low, ears twitching at every sound, every shift in the air. The smell of gasoline had faded, but something else had grown stronger. Human intent, focused, controlled, moving with purpose. Ranger's breathing slowed as his senses sharpened. The pattern was there now. This was no accident. The officer on patrol that night was experienced. He followed protocol. He stayed within the lit paths. He checked in regularly. His radio remained clipped close to his chest, volume turned up just enough to catch every transmission. As he passed between the administrative wing and the equipment storage building, the lights flickered briefly. Just once. He paused. The radio hissed with static. Not loud, not long. Enough. He reached for the radio, and never had the chance. The impact came from behind, fast and precise. The officer hit the ground hard, air forced from his lungs. Pain exploded across his back and shoulders as something heavy pressed him down. He tried to shout. No sound came out. Footsteps retreated into the darkness, measured and calm. By the time emergency crews arrived, the officer was alive, but barely conscious, bruised, disoriented, unable to describe his attacker. Once again, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no alarms triggered, and no random explanations left. Morning brought no comfort. 2 nights, 2 attacks, both clean, both controlled, both impossible to explain away. Briefings were tense and short. Security was increased again, but no one believed it would be enough. The truth had finally taken shape. Someone inside the center knew the schedules, knew the systems, knew how to move unseen. This wasn't chaos. It was planning. Troy stood among the other handlers, feeling the weight of it settle in his chest. He felt the glances now, no longer curious, no longer sympathetic, calculating. Ranger had attacked him. Ranger had reacted violently during the fire, and Ranger remained the only constant. Ranger remained locked away. But Troy no longer believed that meant safety. That evening, the sky darkened early under heavy clouds. The floodlights came on before sunset, casting harsh white light across the yard. Dogs were secured early. Patrols doubled again. Everyone waited. No one said it aloud, but they all knew something was coming. It came just after midnight. Without warning, the containment system disengaged. Not one door, all of them. Metal locks snapped open in rapid succession, echoing like gunfire through the kennel wing. And the dogs poured out. Not in panic, not in confusion, in formation. Handlers rushed from their quarters, alarms blaring, radios erupting with overlapping calls. Smoke wasn't present this time. There was no fire, no obvious threat, only movement. Dozens of canines surged into the open yard, their bodies low, their focus absolute. They didn't scatter. They didn't run blindly. They ran together. Their barking began as a ripple, then became a wave, deep, powerful, unified. The sound rolled across the compound like thunder. Ranger emerged from his enclosure at the front. His posture was different now, steady, commanding. The other dogs fell in behind him without hesitation, responding not to handlers, but to instinct older than training. The handlers froze. No one had ever seen this. Not like this. The pack moved as one, heading across the yard toward the same destination. Boots followed at a distance, officers shouting commands that went unheard. The dogs ignored them. They trusted something else. Ranger slowed near the center of the compound, then stopped abruptly. The rest of the pack halted behind him, and then they turned. Together. Their barking intensified, focused on a single direction, a single target. Human voices fell silent. Every officer present felt it in their bones. This wasn't aggression, it was indication. The dogs were pointing. Commanding Officer Reed arrived moments later. He was a man of few words and many deployments. He had seen chaos. He had seen fear. What stood before him now unsettled him in a way few things ever had. Dozens of trained canines, unified, focused, unwavering. Ranger stood at the front, body tense but controlled, eyes locked forward. His chest rose and fell steadily. He wasn't barking blindly. He was leading. Reed raised a hand. The handlers fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Reed spoke. One sentence. Quiet. Decisive. He gave Ranger permission to lead. The words changed everything. The pack surged forward again, barking in unison as they moved deeper into the compound. Officers followed now, not trying to stop them, but to keep up. For the first time since arriving at the K9 National Training Center, the dogs were no longer reacting. They were testifying. And whatever they were about to reveal would shatter every assumption made so far. The dogs stopped at the parking lot. Floodlights washed over rows of vehicles, casting harsh shadows across asphalt, stained with soot from the fire days earlier. The barking did not fade. It sharpened, focused, unified, relentless. Ranger stood at the front. His body was rigid, muscles locked, eyes fixed on one car. Officer Troy's car. The barking intensified. Handlers slowed, confusion rippling through the group. Officers exchanged looks. Some hesitated. Others felt a cold certainty settle in their stomachs. This was no coincidence. Ranger moved first. He circled the vehicle once, then stopped at the rear. His nose pressed against the metal. His barking changed, short, urgent bursts that carried panic instead of warning. The sound cut straight through Troy, because Troy was standing right there, unharmed, breathing, alive. And yet Ranger was acting as if Troy was dying. Commander Reed stepped forward. He studied the scene, the dogs, the car, Ranger's frantic behavior. His instincts, sharpened by decades of command, told him one thing. This was not about the fire. He nodded once. The trunk was opened. The sound of the latch releasing echoed unnaturally loud. Metal creaked. The trunk lid lifted. And the world shifted. Inside, barely visible under the harsh white light, was a human figure, bound, motionless. The smell hit first. Gasoline, heavy, suffocating. Someone shouted, hands moved. The trunk was fully opened. Officer Troy lay inside, the real one. His face was pale, lips tinged blue, chest barely rising. His wrists were bound tightly, his uniform soaked with fuel. He coughed weakly as fresh air rushed in, gasping, choking as hands pulled him free. Alive, barely. The yard erupted into chaos. Medics rushed forward. Radios exploded with frantic calls. The dogs continued barking, their voices now chaotic with adrenaline and relief. Ranger stopped barking. He surged forward, pressing his body against Troy's side, whining softly as medics worked. His tail trembled. His nose pressed against Troy's chest, confirming what he needed to know. The heartbeat was real, familiar. Home. The truth landed like a physical blow. The man who had been walking among them, training with them, speaking in Troy's voice, wearing Troy's face, was not Troy at all. The imposter had been perfect. Too perfect. He had mirrored Troy's routines, his posture, even his concern for Ranger after the attack. He had spoken softly about stress, about pressure, about understanding canine behavior. But Ranger had known. From the first moment, not by sight, by scent, by rhythm, by silence between heartbeats. The fake Troy smelled wrong, not fear, control. His heart rate stayed steady when it shouldn't have. His movements were precise but hollow. His concern for Ranger had been rehearsed, his late-night pacing not worry, but calculation. He hadn't been anxious about Ranger's condition. He had been anxious because Ranger had recognized him. The imposter ran. The moment the real Troy was pulled from the trunk, the man turned and bolted across the lot. He moved fast, cutting between vehicles, disappearing into shadows beyond the floodlights. He almost made it. Almost. Ranger broke free. He launched forward, his body a blur of motion, barking once, sharp and commanding. The other canines followed without hesitation. The chase tore through the compound. Footsteps pounded against concrete. Radios crackled uselessly. The imposter crashed through a service gate, sprinting toward the outer perimeter. Ranger closed the distance. The man stumbled near the fence, panic finally breaking through his control. His breathing turned erratic. His movements lost precision. Too late. Ranger hit him hard, taking him down with practiced force. Teeth clamped onto fabric, pinning him without lethal intent. Other canines surrounded them, barking in a deafening wall of sound. Officers arrived seconds later. The imposter was restrained, silenced. Dawn broke quietly over the K9 National Training Center. The real Troy lay in the infirmary, wrapped in blankets, oxygen mask fogging with each breath. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then he saw Ranger. The dog sat beside the bed, unmoving, eyes locked on Troy's face. When Troy's fingers twitched, Ranger leaned forward, pressing his head gently against Troy's hand. The bond reconnected instantly. No confusion, no doubt. Troy's breathing steadied. Across the facility, investigations began. The stolen files were still missing. The imposter refused to speak. His identity remained unknown. No agency claimed him. No records matched his face. He had planned everything carefully. Except for one thing. A dog that trusted instinct more than appearances. Ranger was cleared, commended, quietly honored in ways that mattered. But the questions remained. What were the files for? Who was the imposter working for? Was he alone? Or had this been only the first move in something much larger? As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the training yard, Ranger sat alert beside Troy, ears twitching at distant sounds. The danger was gone, for now, but Ranger remained ready, because some threats did not end when they were caught. They only waited.